The production of lymphocytes is called lymphopoiesis, just like the production of erythrocytes is called erythropoiesis. And this is one type of hematopoiesis, right? The production of blood cells. So hematopoiesis is the production of blood cells generally, and then erythropoiesis is specifically the production of red blood cells. Lymphopoiesis, specifically the production of lymphocytes. And it happened, just like erythropoiesis, in the red bone marrow, but it also involves the thymus and some peripheral lymphoid tissues, and they're produced by lymphoid stem cells, if you recall. So not myeloid stem cells, but lymphoid stem cells. Once lymphocytes are produced in the red bone marrow, some of them will stay in the red bone marrow to mature, and those are B cells and natural killer cells. B cells like bone marrow, right? It's the easiest way to remember it. Another group goes to the thymus to mature, and those are called T cells because they go to the thymus. Again, easy way to remember. There they become mature. And when I say become mature, what I mean is they get those antigen receptors. Right? When they're born, they don't have those antigen receptors, so they get them, they produce them while they're in the thymus. But then at that point, they have to be isolated. So they're isolated from general circulation by the blood-thymus barrier. T cells cannot, at this point, go into the blood because many of them will react to your own body's cells. And you don't want that, because if they react to antigens that are on your blood cells or your liver cells or your pancreas cells or whatever, they'll cause your body to attack those cells. And that's bad. And so they go through a negative selection process where up to 98% of the T cells are deselected and killed. Those that are left will re-enter the bloodstream. So these are mature now T cells that have gotten their receptor, their antigen receptor, and have gone through negative selection, and we know are safe to travel through the bloodstream. This figure from your book is a nice rundown. We start with our hematopoietic stem cells in the bone marrow. Some of those will produce myeloid stem cells, which are not shown here, which will become other kinds of blood cells. And lymphoid stem cells that will then become either B cells and natural killer cells, or will migrate to the thymus and become T cells, which will then mature in the thymus, get their antigen receptor, and have negative selection, get rid of the ones that might attack you. Now, unlike your other leukocytes, like neutrophils and basophils and whatever else, monocytes, T and B cells retain the ability to divide, right? This is kind of a big deal because they're very specific, and they only will look out for a particular kind of antigen that you might find on a particular kind of bacterium or virus. But once they get exposed to that antigen, right, that particular bacterium or virus and the molecules on the outside of the membrane, they will begin dividing. And so then instead of having just one cell to fight that particular invader, you will have dozens and then hundreds and then thousands, and they will continue to divide and also activate other aspects of your immune system. Your lymphoid tissues can include organs, and organs are specifically separated from surrounding tissue by a fibrous capsule made of connective tissue. You also have nodules of just like diffuse lymphoid tissue that are not discrete organs on their own, but are packed within the tissues of other organs. Now that can include what are called fibrous patches, which are lymphoid nodules within your small intestines that help you fight off bacteria. Or it can also be mucosa-associated lymphatic tissue, MALT, which we talked about earlier. And MALT you find wherever you have respiratory or digestive or urinary mucosa. So in your trachea and your lungs, right, you have lymphoid tissue helping protect you from invaders. And here's an example, an animation and then an actual slide of these fibrous patches, these bits of lymphoid tissue inside the actual intestines. And you can see they're stained kind of purple, just like your white blood cells are when you look at them under a microscope, because there are white blood cells all over that patch of lymphoid tissue. Your tonsils are also lymphoid nodules, kind of like those fibrous patches that we saw. And you have 3 sets of them, and they're along the walls of your pharynx and also your oral cavity, again protecting you from infection. You have pharyngeal tonsils, which are in the back of your nasopharynx, which we'll talk about more when we get to the respiratory system. You have palatine tonsils on either side of your hard palate. Now these are usually what we call tonsils, right? When you say, got my tonsils out, you're talking about your palatine tonsils. When you say you got your adenoids out, your pharyngeal tonsil is your adenoid. And then you have lingual tonsils that are paired on either side of the base of your tongue. And here you can see the pharyngeal tonsil, again, in the back of the nasopharynx, that back of the nasal cavity there. Palatine tonsil, this is paired. You have one on each side, just kind of on either side of your uvula, the back of the throat, right? And then lingual tonsil at the base of the tongue, but in the back, so they're hard to see from you just opening your mouth. Your lymph nodes are discrete organs, right? They are, collections of different types of tissue surrounded by a fibrous capsule of connective tissue, and you've got them sort of along the lymphatic collecting vessels at strategic points as the fluid is coming back from like big chunks of your body towards the center. So they filter out that fluid. They also are full of macrophages to eat up junk, lymphocytes to identify antigens of pathogens that might be trying to harm you. And again, they're located like as you're coming back from your arms, right? These are the axillary lymph nodes. In your intestines, your abdominal lymph nodes, you've got them coming back from your legs. You can't see me patting my legs, but your inguinal lymph nodes, and then also coming back from your head, in your neck, you have cervical lymph nodes. And again, these are there to remove pathogens before they return to the bloodstream, but also to identify the pathogens that are invading your body so that your body can let loose an immune response. Now, if they're responding to an infection, they might swell. And so this is why your great auntie may have come and tried to feel if your glands are swollen to see if you're sick. My grandma used to do that all the time. It's not glands that are swollen, it's lymph nodes, but you can feel them swelling sometimes when you're sick. So this is what a lymph node looks like, and you've got this outer area that's full of dendritic cells, which are like macrophages. They are big cells that will engulf pathogens and eat them up. And then as you move further, you've got sort of outer and then deep cortex, where you have then T and B cells, which can be exposed to these pathogens and cause an immune response. But note that you have several vessels coming in to the lymph node, and only a single vessel going out. So imagine that you have a big room, and you've got 4 or 5 hallways coming into that room, and only one hallway going out, and everyone's moving in a single direction. You're going to end up with a crowd in here, right? Movement is not going to be very good through here, and so you get stuck there for a while. That's kind of the point. You want your lymphatic fluid and all of the potential pathogens and pieces of crud that are in there to get stuck in that lymph node to make sure that they have a chance to meet up with the various dendritic cells and lymphocytes that they'd find in this lymphoid tissue, right? Again, if you think that there are like criminals in the lymph here, and you have your agents here, your lymphocytes looking for particular criminals, you want those criminals to be forced to spend a lot of time in that lymph node. So while these organs and also this just lymphoid tissue is there to help protect you, it's also exposed to a lot of bacteria coming in from the outside environment. So it can itself become infected or inflamed, and when that happens, you get an ascites right at the end of this. So tonsillitis or appendicitis, these are when your tonsils, your appendix, become infected and inflamed, and very often you'll remove them. Now, with tonsillitis, it used to be that you always just cut them out. Now, sometimes they're trying to urge people to wait and treating them with antibiotics before you take these out, but the appendix can rupture, and so you don't want to wait on that, and you want to get rid of it when you have to. Aside from your lymph nodes and tonsils and MALT and those things that we're talking about, one of your major lymphatic organs is your thymus. And your thymus is important for a few reasons. Most notably, T cell development, which we've already talked about. It's where T cells go to mature. But it also produces hormones that are involved in that process. So it is an endocrine gland as well, which is why we mentioned it in Chapter 16. But its size and its ability to secrete these hormones declines with age. When you are a baby, it's very big. And then as you get older and older and older, especially after puberty, it begins to diminish in size and break down. And by the time you're 50, it's almost gone. And this is correlated with an increased susceptibility to disease. Now, it's not necessarily the cause. There are other reasons why when you get older, you get more susceptible to disease, but this is correlated with that. And here you can see where it sits. It's right on top of your heart there in the mediastinum. Now, it looks a little bit like your thyroid gland, but it's not. Don't confuse these two. Your thyroid gland is up here where your trachea meets your larynx, right? The thymus is down closer to your heart. And as you can see, it has two main lobes, a right lobe and a left lobe. And then each lobe is divided into these septa, right, that are sort of shaped like hexagons. If you cut it open, you can see that it has a cortex on the outside, and this is where T cells are developing and getting their antigen receptors and negative selections going on. And so because of that, they maintain this blood-thymus barrier in the cortex so that those T cells don't get into your blood before we know that they're not going to attack your own cells. In the middle, or the medulla, there is no blood-thymus barrier, and after a few weeks, these T cells will enter the medulla and will enter the bloodstream via one of those blood vessels, some capillaries, and those T cells can then go off and join your bloodstream or visit the rest of your body. They could also pop into a lymphatic vessel and leave the thymus through a lymphatic vessel. It's another possibility. Here you can see the cortex around the outside, right? And then this is medulla in the middle, again, where those T cells can leave. Your spleen also operates as a lymphatic organ. So we've talked about the spleen before because it removes abnormal red blood cells and recycles them. Remember, and then we get your bilirubin, which gets put into your intestines with your bile and ends up making your poo brown and your pee yellow and all that stuff. But it also essentially serves as like a lymph node for your blood. So your lymph nodes are places where your lymph goes, and you can have macrophages eat any junk that's in there, and you can give your blood cells, your lymphocytes, a chance to see any pathogens that might be in that lymph so that they can make an immune response occur. This is what happens in your spleen with your blood. Your blood spends some extra time in your spleen, and it's exposed to B and T cells so that you can know what kind of infections you got going, and you can have an immune response. If you look at someone chop the top half of them off, right, and look straight down, you can see that the spleen is sort of just behind the stomach, kind of opposite side of the liver, so kind of on the left side there. And this is interesting. Now that I'm looking at this figure closely, it seems to be entirely reversed. Your spleen and your stomach should be on the left side, the liver should be on your right side. And I know that this is the back because of the vertebral column, and these are your abdominal muscles in the front. But anyway, that's where your spleen is. On the inside of the spleen, you've got red pulp with mostly red blood cells and white pulp with mostly lymphocytes. You also have macrophages in the red pulp. And here's where you can see that white pulp that's very, very purple because of the white blood cells, and then the red pulp up here is largely blood and macrophages. Again, giving the blood a chance to get exposed to those macrophages and lymphocytes so that you can fight off any infections that you have.